Welcome to Regensburg's Old Town. Welcome to this part of the Old Town, which once was the medieval Jewish quarter. And welcome to the Regensburg Jewish Heritage Tour. In 2019, the Jewish community of Regensburg inaugurated the new synagogue, which is in fact the second new synagogue in the history of the city of Regensburg. The first one was built here in 1912. It was destroyed during the Kristallnacht pogrom, and this black sign talks about the fact that the new synagogue of Regensburg, which was standing exactly on the spot and which was built in 1912, was destroyed during the Kristallnacht pogrom in 1938. So the spot for the second building of the new synagogue was not chosen randomly. It was a project supported by the federal government, by the municipal government, by the local Jewish community, and by the German Jewish community. The building has two entrances. This is the main one from the facade, which is decorated with the three rings, which are the symbols of the three waves of deportations of the Regensburg Jews. The second entrance is from the side, and that's where we're heading to. And it has one big sign and a very big stumbling stone. The sign lists the names of the Regensburg Jews who were deported from the city to Theresienstadt and Auschwitz in 1942. "31 people who belonged to the Jewish community of Regensburg were deported on September 23rd, 1942 to Theresienstadt and Auschwitz, where they were murdered." That's what's written on this big stumbling stone. This new building of the synagogue and the budget spent on its construction was around 9 million euro, is attached to the old community building. And if you look carefully at the design of these windows, the design looks very similar to the layout of the windows of the religious buildings which belong to the Ashkenazi Jews in Eastern and Central Europe. So these days, the Regensburg Jewish community counts about 1,000 Jews. The community was re-established in the post-war period by those Jews, mainly from Eastern Europe, who survived in the concentration camps, who were here in the displaced persons camp, and who didn't want to go back. Around 1960s, they got the first community center open with a school, and then the community started growing really fast in the late 1980s, 1990s, thanks to the former Soviet Jewish immigrants. According to the historical records, 3 Jews of Regensburg survived the war in Theresienstadt and concentration camps, and they didn't return to the city. This sculpture decorates one of the walls of the Regensburg Cathedral. It was placed there in the 1300s during the time of the first tensions between the Christians and the Jews. And it was created and placed on the cathedral to humiliate the Regensburg Jews. Its derogative to the Jews meaning was quite clear. You can see here a soul and 3 Jews. One is holding a soul by the ear, 2 other are suckling on her teats. Somewhat similar sculptures decorated cathedrals in the old cities in Central Europe, which had quite old Jewish communities. So that was a more or less common thing for the period of the Middle Ages. So it was placed on the wall of the cathedral to humiliate the Jews. And if you're wondering why it's still there, well, because it's part of the heritage. And Regensburg is a UNESCO listed city. At the bottom of this part of the wall, there is the sign which explains the history of the sculpture, which emphasizes its modern day meaning and significance. So just let me give you one quotation from what's written here. Today, this sculpture is meant to remind all people to take action against every form of propaganda, hate, exclusion, and anti-Semitism. During the inauguration of the second building of the new synagogue of Regensburg, the Bishop of Regensburg asked the Jews for forgiveness for the fact that the Christians didn't protect the Jews in 1519 when they were expelled from Regensburg, and in 1930s during the Nazi time. So this sculpture was placed on this wall of the cathedral on purpose. So this wall faces the area which was part of the medieval Jewish quarter. So one of the entrances into the Jewish quarter was right here. The second entrance was where you see the terracotta building. So they wanted to make sure that the Jews would see it on their way to the Jewish quarter and back. So, and now from here, we're heading to the area which used to be the medieval Jewish quarter of Regensburg. Just a few interesting facts about the Regensburg medieval Jewish community. So the Jews settled here in the 900s. At least the first written record of the Jews living in Regensburg belongs to the year 981. And it's a known fact, and it's a confirmed fact, that the Jews have been living here in the same place for around 600 years, from the 900s up until 1519, when they were expelled from Regensburg. The community was not massacred here during the Rindfleisch pogrom or during the Black Death pogrom in 1349. They were protected by the town hall and by the Regensburg's residents. Of course, they had to pay a lot of taxes or protection fees to the emperor, to the town hall, to be able to live in Regensburg, and especially to be able to live in Regensburg during the time of the pogroms. We are approaching the square, which used to be the medieval Jewish quarter of Regensburg. In the Middle Ages, this area looked very different. According to the archaeologists, there were around 30 houses here which belonged to the Jews, a synagogue, and a yeshiva, which was quite known in Central Europe at the time. The community mainly consisted of merchants and moneylenders. We know that in the late Middle Ages, there was a butcher and a Jewish doctor. And quite detailed descriptions of the Jewish property are still available in the city archives. Since the Jews were the taxpayers, the city made a very detailed description of their property. And those documents are still in the city archives. In 1990s, archaeologists and historians did excavation works on the square, and they found remains of the old houses. They found a lot of artifacts which belong to the city's general history, starting from the Roman times. They found a lot of artifacts which belong to the Jewish community of the Middle Ages. As a result, the underground museum was open, and the entrance to this museum is over there. And in order to get in, you need to join a group tour. The entrance, or to have a visit scheduled for the days when the museum is open. In the early 2000s, an Israeli sculptor, Danny Caravan, the same Danny Caravan who created the memorial on the Alley of Human Rights in Nuremberg, was tasked to design another memorial here in Regensburg. And he called that memorial the Place of Encounter. And that's what we're approaching. According to the historians and this architect, it was placed on the remains of the basement of the old medieval synagogue of Regensburg, which was built in 1220s. It was a one-nave Gothic building, and the old synagogues of Vienna and Krakow and Prague were modeled on that old synagogue of Regensburg, which in its turn was modeled on the old synagogue of Worms. According to the vision of the sculptor, Danny Caravan, the memorial was supposed to be an open place, the space of the encounter, where people can meet, where people can spend time. The basement of this Protestant church, which was built here after the Jews had been expelled from this area, is decorated with the three signs in Hebrew, in German, and in English, which tell a brief history of this neighborhood and provide a description of this place and this piece of art. So in 1519, the 600 Jews of Regensburg, including the students of the yeshiva, were expelled from the city. But it doesn't mean that the community was never re-established. There was already some Jewish presence in Regensburg already in the 1600s. And now let's explore another part of the old town, which is connected with that period, early modern time. In the Middle Ages and early modern period, Regensburg was one of the most important cities in the Holy Roman Empire and the seat of the imperial parliament sessions, which were attended by the emperor, by his court, by the German nobility, and the Jews were oftentimes the counselors, the advisors, and the financiers of those nobles and the emperor. And they were granted with a special permission in the 1600s to reside in Regensburg during the time of the sessions of the imperial parliament. We know that some Jewish community was established here already in the 1700s. At least that was the time when the Jews rented a merchant's house in this beautiful lane to be used as a prayer house and as a community center. Look at these beautiful Gothic buildings. One of them was used as a prayer house in the 1700s and up until 1841. And looking at the facades of the buildings, you will never guess which of those was used as a prayer house and as a community building. Only getting closer to this red mansion, which belonged to a wealthy Regensburg patrician, you can see a memorial sign which says that once it was a synagogue, or to be exact, a prayer house. And the first known Rebbe of Regensburg, who became the first Regensburg Rebbe since 1519, since the year when the Jews were expelled from the city, became the Rebbe of the synagogue, which occupied this beautiful building. And that's the sign. Isaac Alexander was its Rebbe, and he was known as the first Rebbe who spoke German. This is one of the famous Regensburg towers. These towers were built by the wealthy merchants who called themselves here patricians in the 1200s. What's interesting about this tower is the fact that in its inner courtyard there is a stone with the following inscription: "The Jews were expelled from Regensburg in 1519. And that stone was placed there in the inner courtyard of this tower by the tower's owner. Why did he do it? That's unknown. Obviously, the Jewish community of Regensburg kept growing in the 17 and 1800s. And it seems that in the 1800s, they already needed a new place for the synagogue and their community center. And they rented one of those Regensburg towers, which was here, which was on the spot of the one-story building, together with the tower, which was to be repurposed into a synagogue with the men's prayer room on the ground floor and the galleries for women on the first and second floors. They rented the adjacent building, which had a shul and a flat for the head of the shul. And that synagogue was here up until the first decade of the 1900s. The problem about the building was that underneath this lane there was a creek which was deteriorating its basement, and gradually the tower started falling apart, and it became clear that the new building would be a must, and the community started gathering funds to build a proper building of the first synagogue for the first time since 1519, when the Jews were expelled from Regensburg. So here's the sign which says that once here was a synagogue in the tower, which was here, and the tower was here up until 1938. The synagogue, which was placed in the tower, was here from 1841 till 1907, and then the community inaugurated the new Regensburg synagogue, which was on that spot where we started our tour. And now let's go into this passageway, which brings us back to the Middle Ages and to the 1500s, when the Jews were expelled from Regensburg. Prior to the expulsion, the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian, who was a protector of the Jews, died, and the city council announced that they would not be able to protect the local Jews any longer. So the Jews were expelled. The synagogue was destroyed, the yeshiva was destroyed, and the cemetery was desecrated. And the tombstones from the Jewish cemetery were used to build the houses and oftentimes the churches. And these days, you can find about a dozen of the old Jewish tombstones which decorate the facades of the Gothic buildings. And here's one of the examples. And here is the second example. This building of the old town hall was of primary importance for the Regensburg Jews. They went there to pay special protection taxes. Later, they would attend the parliament sessions here, and that was in the 16 and 1700s. In the middle of the 1700s, Regensburg became the permanent seat of the imperial parliament in the Holy Roman Empire, which collapsed during the Napoleonic War. And when that Napoleonic War ended, the Jews of Regensburg received equal rights. The community started growing, and in the late 1800s, there were around 1,000 Jews living here. They were representatives in the local chamber of commerce. They were active in the city's political life and in the local government. They owned businesses, they owned restaurants, and then the community was wiped out during the Nazi times. Join us in Regensburg to explore the city's fascinating Jewish heritage and to learn about one of Germany's oldest Jewish communities. See you in Regensburg. Tschüss!